Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. This podcast is sponsored by Collins, high-quality student books, teacher guides and unbeatable value revision for GCSE and A-level sociology. If you'd like to see what they've got on offer, then please do visit collins.co.uk and search for sociology. The Sociology Show podcast is also brought to you in association with Tutor2U, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. You can visit their website at tutor2u.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so it's been a little while since I've done one of these. Unfortunately, it's been quite difficult to get hold of new people to speak to. People are very busy at this time of year in the lead up to exams. And so unfortunately, I've not been able to get hold of anyone for a little while. So it's a bit of a request. If there is someone that would like to be involved in the show, if that's you yourself, if you'd like to do an interview, or if you know someone else that would like to do an interview, then please do tell them to get in touch with me. You can contact me on the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. Likewise, if there is someone that you'd really like me to speak to, maybe a favourite sociologist, maybe it's your lecturer at university, but if you think there's someone that would be really good on the show, then please do get in touch on that same email address. I'll be delighted to speak to people, whichever field of sociology they are working in. And so without further ado, let's go over to the interview for this episode with Dr Zampini. Hi, thank you very much for coming on to the Sociology Show podcast. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I am Dr. Guilia Zampini, and I am a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Greenwich. And I am generally, I'd say, I describe myself as a drug policy researcher. So that's kind of my field of research is drug policy reform. But yeah, I'm interested in all sorts of things. And I did my research was about the use of evidence in policy. So it was about how and whether and how kind of scientific evidence was part of the policy process in any meaningful way and how it was understood by kind of policy stakeholders. And I was looking at drug policy, and I was also looking at sex work, prostitution policy. So that's my kind of background and where I came from in terms of research. But I'm doing quite different stuff now, which I'm happy to talk about if you want me to.
Yeah, please. I mean, that attracted, when I found your Twitter profile, it said, interested in policy making, morality, drugs, sex work and dance music. I thought I need to chat to this person. That is such a fantastic selection of sociological ideas there.
I think it's like, it's sort of, I try to make the Twitter profile kind of encompassing so I could reflect at least some of the things that I'm most interested in and I kind of work around. But yeah, my most recent project is called People and Dancefloors, and it basically looks at individuals' relationships with dance floors and drug taking. So it's very much a kind of participatory, person-centered kind of narrative around the whole, relational dance floors, drugs, and how people feel about these things and what these things mean in their lives. And we did, as the first part of the project, we did a film. So it was a short film that we made, kind of collating different participants' stories in a kind of thematic way. So it's very much like doing kind of qualitative thematic analysis, but kind of putting it together as a short documentary. And there's lots to be said about doing research and trying to do things in a slightly different way than the traditional way of kind of writing academic papers and so on. I'm very much a believer in in trying to use lots of different media to engage different audiences as much as possible.
Do you mind saying a little bit more about that? Because one of the most common questions I get from people who listen to episodes is about wanting to find out about the methodologies of sociologists. So, it's really interesting to hear if you're taking a slightly different approach.
So I guess I come from a kind of traditional qualitative methods sort of background. I'm not a quantitative researcher. I've never done kind of hard statistics or anything like that. I'm one for like language and narratives and meaning, and I'm interested in how kind of people understand themselves and how people kind of create meanings in their lives. So I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. At the same time, I also always thought about how difficult it is to access academic knowledge or academic, because there's a lot of lingo, there's a lot of kind of, the language involved is really impenetrable for a lot of people. And so, even though we're talking about people's narratives and kind of meaning making, often these things don't come across or are not accessible to a lot of people. And I think that part of that is understandable, because we write for other academics and we write for the consumption of other academics. We write about theory, we write about stuff that isn't necessarily for public consumption. But I think also some of the work we do, or at least in part the work that we do, is also about changing, informing people and society, and maybe changing our understanding of things, changing our perception, because a lot of our perceptions, particularly in the context of drugs, are based on, stereotypes and myths and a misunderstanding. So anyway, so in terms of methods and the project, I wanted to try to do something that would be accessible to people in terms of interacting directly with participants' knowledge and experiences, whilst at the same time also doing something that was following the tradition of qualitative thematic analysis, which is basically, should we start with the beginning? So essentially how it's done in my experience is you conduct semi-structured interviews, and by semi-structured I mean you start with like an interview guide where you have similar questions or the same questions, base questions that you ask all your participants. And obviously it's semi-structured, so you can go off on a tangent or you can follow a train of thought together in conversation, but you're still revisiting those same questions with all of the participants that you speak to. And then after that, usually there are some kind of emerging themes, often around the kinds of questions that you're asking, that kind of recur or repeat across all the participants' narratives. So then, you're kind of looking at those themes and you're trying to organize your analysis and understanding around those themes. So that's what I tried to do in the context of the film. So, there are, I guess, themes that emerge out of the questions, so directly in relation to the questions. And then there are also themes that one doesn't necessarily account for at the start. So they kind of, they usually just pop out, and often they pop out and they recur across all the different participants' narratives, which is, I don't know, I guess it's called emergence. It doesn't really, it sort of says, it does what it says. It's quite obvious. Yeah, I'm happy, I don't know, I'm happy to say more about that, but I think the fundamental point here is that using film as a way of engaging audiences with research is, I think, a very interesting and potentially less explored avenue for research.
Yeah, agreed. That's really interesting. So I guess you're trying to kind of build that rapport with the people. I mean, how long were you kind of interviewing the people for?
So some of the interviews went on for, it just very much depends, because some people are more chatty than others, and sometimes you have better chemistry with some people than others, and so, some interviews would go on for like an hour and a half, Some other interviews will be about 30 minutes. It just varies really from individual to individual. And then, of course, there's always a build-up to the interview where you have an exchange with the person. You try to explain to them what the project is about. Sometimes that exchange is in written format, like via email. Sometimes you have a chat with them, maybe on the phone or virtually, just to kind of check in with them, to really kind of to kind of create that relationship, to give the opportunity for participants to ask questions, as well as, I guess, in some cases and for some participants, it was a big step for them to get involved, because a lot of them were talking about their drug use, which is a stigmatized activity, in front of the camera. And therefore, they kind of usually research participants are protected by anonymity. So they feel free to say things and even talk about stigmatized or illicit activities without fear of repercussion. However, some of my participants, particularly in the UK context, where I hate saying my participants. I don't know why I say it. They're not mine. They're just participants to the project. They were essentially, burying themselves in front of the camera, and they were just, revealing their identity. So there was a lot of kind of steps that had to be taken in advance to ensure that they were happy for those stories, for their stories to be told, and to put their faces and identities out there. And I think part of the project was about humanizing people who use drugs and about kind of breaking the taboo. So obviously their participation, the direct participation, was very crucial to at least meeting one of the central aims of the project. But at the same time, also a lot of care is taken to make sure that the participants are happy with the end product. So we before we released the film, we did a participant review screening, to make sure that everybody was happy with the content. And obviously we made changes and edited things as and when participants asked us to. So it was very much a kind of shared reviewing process.
Yeah, kind of respondent validation, if you like, before it goes out.
That's right, yes.
Do you mind getting stuck into some of the stories? I mean, I'm interested to see, was there kind of common themes or reasons behind people's drug use in the dance music culture? Was there some things that came up quite a lot, or time and time again?
Time and time again. It's incredible, actually, how much some of the same words, kept coming out. Freedom, socializing, connection, liberation, being outside of the day-to-day, and being able to, travel beyond the mundane, as well as being with strangers and feeling connected to strangers. So all of these themes came up quite a lot in relation to dance floors. And interestingly, in relation to drug taking as well, some of the same motivations would be used in terms of, as far as going out to dance floors, as well as taking drugs. So feeling free, feeling more connected, feeling uninhibited, and being able to kind of lose oneself, and being kind of connected as well as inside oneself and inside one's mind at the same time. So all of these things came up kind of quite regularly. And socializing obviously was a big thing. Quite a lot of people mentioned that their drug use and dance floors was good for their mental health. So, which is, I guess, in a sense, in some ways counterintuitive, because usually drug use is associated with negative mental health effects or outcomes. So quite interesting recurring themes.
Yeah, I was always interested in the original sort of the rave culture of the late 80s and into the early 90s. And Sarah Thornton wrote a book on this as well. But the word that often came up was this kind of idea of escapism. A lot of people working very boring, mundane jobs, maybe working in a factory Monday to Friday, and then come Friday night, it was just that escapism, freedom, whatever you would like to call it.
Absolutely, but I also think that it's unfortunate that escapism has got kind of like a bad reputation. It's almost like got negative connotations, because it's often seen as or perceived as something like, you're escaping your adult responsibilities. You are, you're being kind of fickle, or, in some ways, I think it's got a bad name, but actually it can be, a form of escapism can be very beneficial, for people's kind of enjoyment of life, and as well as, I think it can be very beneficial. So I think we need to kind of reclaim escapism as a good thing.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I mean, the other thing I was interested in is there a difference between kind of different dance floors? Because within dance music, obviously that's very broad. If you think about the different genres, I'm assuming there was kind of a different association of drugs with certain musics, MDMA with, sort of house music, etc.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because so far I've taken the project to essentially 3 different cultural contexts. So I started off in the UK, and then I sort of I interviewed some people in Malta, and then I'm now interviewing people in Brazil. And the interesting thing about drug cultures are to an extent more linked, as far as I can tell, to place than they are, and time, than they are to musical genre. I mean, obviously, I don't, in terms of electronic dance music, and they're different genres, but of course, there in some cultures, like, in kind of like rock and metal, maybe there's more drinking.
Yeah.
And like maybe in kind of reggae and dub, there's more kind of consumption of weed, of cannabis. But in terms of dance music, I'd say place is more important. Place and time is more important, perhaps, than genre itself. So, for instance, in the UK, in lots of big urban centres in the UK, there's been a relatively recent resurgence of ketamine use. So there's been sort of 2 waves of ketamine use in the dance music scene, in lots of different kind of subgenres of dance music. So there was like ketamine use arrived in the kind of like sort of early to mid sort of 2006, 2007 till 2010. It became a big thing. Then it kind of went away for a bit. Then it came back. I mean, certain drugs have always been around. So MDMA is a central drug in the dance music scene. But compared to, for example, a place like Malta, where ketamine use isn't at all something that is established. So most people will use MDMA, they will use cocaine, they will use alcohol, but not ketamine. So that's interesting. And similarly in the UK, it seems like a lot of different scenes, sub-scenes of dance. So techno, house, but even garage and so on. There's definitely a mix of MDMA and ketamine on the dance floor. Yeah.
So a lot of it's probably about accessibility of the drug as opposed to the music. Is that a fair point?
It's like accessibility of the drug. There's also something to do with like, there's definitely something about what is available on the market at particular points in time, and also that certain drug cultures get established within peer groups. And so if something is going around within your particular peer group of the people that you go out with, then you might be more likely to kind of get into that as that becomes available, and then then it becomes part of your drug culture within that group. But it's definitely something about supply, because, for instance, back in, I think it was 2010, 2011, there was an MDMA drought. And so, and obviously at that point, most people substituted MDMA. They would have taken MDMA if that was available, but because it wasn't available, most people sort of shifted over to methadone, which is like a kind of like a catinone, is like a something that actually used to be available, weirdly enough, it could be obtained legally through head shops, what used to be head shops, which then closed down. So there was a massive hysteria and kind of panic around the consumption of methadone, because it was quite cheap and I guess widely available at that point. And anyway, but that was purely a result of the lack of MDMA. It wasn't, it was just like it needed to be substituted with something else.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
I was going to ask you about cost, actually, because I did wonder if that came into it as well. For example, even if people desired wraps of cocaine, that doesn't come cheap. So was cost a fundamental to it as well?
That is interesting about cocaine. I think the price of cocaine has generally kind of gone down, or it has kind of steadily decreased up to a point in more recent years. So cocaine never used to be, so originally in the rave scene, speed would have been much more common as a substance. But then somehow at some point, cocaine became more common because the price of it became more accessible. So the price of it went down. And so it became more affordable for people. And obviously, even now, I think I would say more affordable. It's probably still about 40 to 50 pounds for like half a gram of cocaine. So I don't think it's that affordable really, but it's sort of, obviously the street value and the quantity vary because, I don't think most punters, most drug users will have scales to actually measure up what they bought. So interestingly, I think cocaine has had a massive surge. And then again, it's become quite a popular substance across the board. So obviously not just in relation to dance floors, but sort of more broadly across different strata of society, across different types of leisure activities as well, including going to the pub.
There's been recent reports about the increase in the use of football fans taking cocaine, which there's been quite a few disturbances at grounds recently, and they found a large amount of younger males in particular taking large levels of cocaine. And I did wonder if the street value must have come down for large numbers of people to be taking it.
I think it did, but also it became more acceptable. It became more acceptable, and it's also something that I think in people's perception, especially when there is a lot of drinking involved, in people's perception, cocaine is used as an antidote to getting too drunk. So you get to a point when you're very drunk, and if you want to keep going, if you want to keep partying, then if you consume cocaine, it will give you the impression of having been sobered up. But it's a false sense of security, because in fact what is happening is that your body can't really break down because the mixture of alcohol and cocaine is very hard for the body to break down. But it will give people the feeling like they're sober again, and they can just keep going. And I think that's part of the reason why the popularity has increased. And of course, the street value, the price of kind of street level cocaine as well. But interestingly, actually in the rave scene, speed is having a renaissance in more recent times. It's kind of like there's weird cycles, that kind of substances kind of come on the scene, and then they become established, and then they go again, and then they come back.
Yeah, I mean, the amphetamine was obviously used because raves didn't really have an end time, did they? So it could go on to, all weekend. So that's interesting. That's made a comeback as well.
I think it's supposed to be good. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you also mentioned the word acceptability, which really interests me, because we're just casually chatting about something here which is illegal, and all of these people are indulging in illegal activity, but it somehow seems acceptable to chat about it, to talk about it. So was there a juxtaposition between what they were doing at weekend, but knowing that actually it was an illegal act?
I think for a lot of people, and particularly for most people, and this is what was the really interesting part that came out of the discussion that I had with participants on the People and Dancefloors project, most people were struggling to maintain a sense of identity because they were afraid of what coming out as a person who uses drugs will do to their reputation. So, many of them were afraid to talk about their experiences with, say, family or at work or with work colleagues, because of course the activities that we're engaging in are still very much illicit, still very much criminalized. But at the same time, people also, within their friendship groups and within their, within their circles, and in amongst the people that were engaging in the same activities, they very much felt like they were part of a community where drug use was normalized. So they're constantly dealing with this back and forth between doing what feels good and what feels normal to them in that particular context, at the same time as having to hide a part of themselves. And of course, some people can hide it more successfully than others, because if you're privileged, if you are, if you're a successful professional, if you are, if you're white, if you're middle class, then, your ability to kind of hide your drug use is much greater compared to, if you're somebody who is, more likely to be stopped and searched by police, for example. So, again, there's a level of privilege that comes with being able to be a person who uses drugs at the same time as being, a professional and not being out as a drug user.
And you mentioned the word normalized as well, which I thought was really interesting, because I know when they're originally studying the rave scene, for example, it's estimated that somewhere around 500,000 people were taking ecstasy every weekend in the UK, which is a huge amount. I mean, where are the statistics at the moment? Is that still within where we are?
I think it's like they said, what I remember off the top of my head, 1 in 3 people will have taken an illicit drug in the course of their lifetime in the UK. So obviously, for the majority, this is cannabis. Yeah. And also, the other issue with I think official statistics is and self-report studies is that people often lie. Yes. When talking about when being asked about having taken a drug or taking drugs currently, people often lie, or people often underreport essentially. It's a bit like when you go to the doctor and they ask you how many units of alcohol you drink per week or something. So of course, it's likely to be an underestimate still, but it's quite a staggering number, really. So it's important to, and of course, if you go back to like classic studies in sociology, like Parker's illegal leisure, I think it's called. Yeah. Anyway, it was an early study that was primarily done in the Northeast, but it's just really interesting because, they came up with this idea of normalization or normalization theory in the context of drugs, which very much said, there is, the drugs are very normalized within the particular groups of people, so particular groups of young people, especially those who are into nightlife and clubbing and festivals and raves and so on.
Because the other thing I was going to ask, actually, talking about the current younger generation, there's a lot of evidence to show that a lot of the under 25s are more straight edged, less likely to drink, healthy eating, take care of their bodies, etc. So I wonder if there has been a reduction. I know there's been a reduction in alcohol consumption, for example. Has there been a reduction in recreational drug use as well?
The way I see it, I think that there's different types of drugs that are being used. I think use of cocaine is quite, it's quite high in amongst young people. So I think they've done some studies, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on this. If I remember correctly, it was like 1 in 9 teenagers had consumed an illicit substance. And obviously, I don't know exactly how it compares to previous generations, but I would say that the appetite for illicit substances in amongst young people, and even like people in their late teens, is still very much there. And, I think drinking is considered to be uncool, but I think things like psychedelics and edibles and so on are having a renaissance as well. So, whereas there has been a kind of lull period for a consumption of LSD, mushrooms and other kind of psychedelics, it went quite low for probably, I'd say, like, I don't know, maybe a couple of decades or so. But then I think it's kind of picking up again. And a lot of it is down to the kind of positive press that psychedelics have been receiving, particularly around the treatment of mental health disorders. And so obviously people young people are receptive to these things, and they're like, well, alcohol and cigarettes are stupid drugs because, they kill a lot of people, but then psychedelics are cool and they're actually good for your mental health. So they want to they're experimenting, but maybe they're experimenting more in different directions.
Yeah, so it's just adapting and changing as opposed to disappearing. Yeah. No, I was going to say, I also wondered, I hate talking about it because it's very much the topic that everyone talks about, but how the pandemic has impacted that, because obviously people have got out of the habit of going out for the last 2 years. Nightclubs have been affected more than most businesses in terms of when they're allowed to open and shut. I wonder if that's going to have long-term effects on the popularity of dance music events and venues as well.
I think there's a bit of a mixture of things going on with the pandemic. I think a lot of people have felt like they were robbed of their youth or their ability to go out, and so obviously that's having long-lasting impact. I think some people are still struggling to adjust to a kind of, let's say, post-pandemic world where actually the virus is still very much present, and so some people are still reluctant to go out. Also, some people are feel like the experience of clubbing may be slightly too intense because it's in a crowded place. You're interacting with people. It's something that is sort of almost the polar opposite of what lockdown and isolation has been.
Yeah.
But despite all of that, I think the appetite for dancing, for going out, is still there, and it's still very much part of youth culture, and I think it will stay a part of youth culture, because I'd say whenever I've been out, or whenever I'm out in London, or whenever I hear people go out and sort of tell me about the I guess the different age groups that are there, there's always young people, there's always 18-year-olds, and there's always like young people that buy tickets to festivals. Although I'd say I think even and incredibly, I think even during the pandemic, I went to a few of this sort of sit-down raves, and it was full of older people would have been part of the first raving generation, and so I think it's a cross-generational, I guess, subculture or cultural expression that continues to attract people.
Yeah, I really, really agree with that. I think you've left with this real kind of cultural hybridity, different age groups. I teach at a sixth form college where the majority of students are 16 to 18, and they were talking about DJs that I used to go and see, and they're still playing. And the popularity of where I live, the DJ Carl Cox lives in Hove. And, there was a Carl Cox event on, and lots of people went who were in their 40s and 50s, but equally attracted a younger crowd as well. And I was amazed to see that Carl Cox actually turns 60 this year as well, which
I know, it's incredible.
It's amazing actually that, that is kind of attracting two different generations, if not more than two generations, actually.
Absolutely. I think there's so many, and the great thing about, about it is also that it facilitates intergenerational contact and communication. Normally people will be, for the necessity of day-to-day life, they'll tend to be, hanging out with people in their own age group. And then of course, if they have children, then they'll hang out with children and their children's friends. But I think, within that kind of dance floor community, it facilitates that kind of, discussions and interactions across different generations. And so I think in the main, it's like a very, very positive kind of, a very positive community building and communication avenue. And then of course, I have rose-tinted glasses to an extent, but at the same time, of course, I don't want to paint it as if like it was completely and entirely unproblematic. Of course, there's going to be the same issues that occur in society, like sexism, transphobia, other exploitative behaviors, excessive harmful behaviors. They take place on dance floors, but increasingly, I think there are interesting movements and collectives that are trying to challenge and change the culture, like there are in any other avenue. And so it's interesting to see that kind of emerging and arising from looking at kind of platforming young people, platforming queer people, and it's just great to see how all of these initiatives are being taken primarily by young people. So
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of come full circle because the original cries of rave music was always about all colours, all creeds, all races, one nation, that kind of idea, and it's still coming to fruition even now.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, of course, there's going to be like corporate interests that try to, effectively take over and shape, the culture in a more consumption-oriented way. For example, in the early raves, it was considered to be uncool to drink because people were taking ecstasy, and they were very purist about it. So it was very much about, if you're taking ecstasy, you drink water, but you don't drink alcohol. But then when raves moved into clubs and club owners needed to make money selling alcohol, then alcohol all of a sudden became a substance that became part of the rave scene. Purely out of economic necessity, and purely, and obviously there was obviously heavy advertisement and targeting of people, and so alcohol became part of dancing and dance culture, but it never was to start with. So yeah, just an interesting kind of example of the negotiation between rebellion and resistance, if you will, and trying to kind of change things from the bottom up, and then kind of having to adjust based on based on the involvement of corporate interests, which can be stronger in some I guess clubs and festivals compared to other smaller kind of initiatives and venues.
Yeah, as someone that's been to Ibiza many times, and I can remember that's one of the sadder bits of it, actually, when you see big corporate sellouts and events that are based on you have to buy a table for £300 and spend a certain amount. It sort of loses the essence of what rave music was about for me. Maybe I'm a bit over the hill for it. Maybe I'm just showing my age there.
No, of course, but I went to Ibiza and I was just completely horrified and shocked at just how much things cost, and it made the whole essence of raving as like an inclusive, freeing kind of experience. And of course, then it becomes exclusive and it becomes only for elites, essentially, in the context of Ibiza, and that it loses its power. It loses its power. So yeah, it's. Yeah, but anyway, that happens. But what also happens is that there are so many still, that are trying to hold on to and recreate the same kind of, original politics of inclusion, of equality. So that's great.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you. Could I ask you to give out some details if people want to find out more about your work, if they could add you on Twitter, or where can they search for it?
Yes, absolutely. So if you want to find out more about the project, we have a website. It's www.peopleanddancefloors.com, and we'd love some feedback on the film, as well as any other aspect of the project. So please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And you can also find us on Twitter at @PDancefloors, as well as you can tweet at me. So it's at GF Zampini. Get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Giulia. I really, really do appreciate it, and thanks for taking me back down memory lane. Just, I'm gonna go and put on an old Carl Cox CD now, just to.
Nice. Cheers. Thanks, Matthew. Enjoy it.
Lovely. Take care. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.